Refrigeration and insulation aboard the R.M.S. Titanic. All large ocean-going passenger steamers were provided with refrigeration machinery and insulated chambers for carrying fresh meat for consumption during the voyage. Many steamers were also equipped to carry cargoes of frozen or chilled meat. Titanic carried a large array of food and perishables, all requiring refrigeration at various temperatures in separate compartments: fruit, flowers, fish, mutton, etc. Eggs, butter, and poultry as well, just to name a few. Some of these required in large quantities. The amount of butter alone was 6,000 pounds. The amount of beef totaled 75,000 pounds. Titanic was fitted with freezers for both eastbound and westbound beef, both freezers sharing a separate and adjoining thawing room. This was indicative of the huge amount of food that was carried and the concern over freshness. The holds and storerooms devoted to this purpose were insulated, and depending on the requirements were kept merely cooled or freezing or near freezing temperatures throughout the voyage. Titanic's refrigerating equipment was designed to the White Star Line specifications, not only provided for the cooling of the ship's provision rooms and pantry, but also cooled drinking water, supplied cupboard coolers, and various points throughout the first, second, and third class accommodations. Space was also provided for refrigerated cargo at the aft end of the orlop deck, with a capacity providing for about 40 cubic feet per room. Cargo space from frozen meat. Cargo space for frozen meat in a ship of Titanic's era. Cargo space for chilled meat. Cargo space for chilled meat in the era of Titanic. Notice that the pieces are hung rather than stacked. The refrigeration units were of CO2 type, utilizing this gas carbon dioxide. When its compressed forms, instead of air, the CO2 liquefies when cooled at a point which was passed through a coil of iron piping located within a tank containing brine, which is a solution of chloride and calcium. Within the coil, the CO2 absorbed heat from the brine, expanded, and reassumed its gaseous form at about -10 Fahrenheit. The surrounding brine became quickly chilled. In turn, when reduced to about 0 degrees Fahrenheit, was withdrawn by the pump and circulated through the circuits or grids of piping that ran under the decks along the upper parts of the vessel's sides to the refrigerated compartments. Separate grid sections within each compartment were interlaced so that if one were to fail, it would not cause a loss of cooling to the entire wall or ceiling. Grid sections were fastened in place with hanger bolts and angle iron supports and were not to exceed approximately 12,000 feet each in length. Although carbon dioxide gas had drawbacks, its major advantage was greater degree of safety in case of a leak. Carbon dioxide gas is a respirable gas, and although the escape of a large quantity could certainly be dangerous, in small amounts it did not present a significant hazard. On the other hand, being odorless, leaks were not readily detected. Titanic's refrigeration system was managed by J&E Hall Limited, Kent, and consisted of 2 horizontal duplex machines, each of which combined 2 complete units, capable of independent operation, so that actually 4 refrigerating units were provided. Half of the refrigerating insulation had ample capacity to deal with the whole of the duties required. The other half were considered reserves. These machines were located on the port side of the reciprocating engine room. The compressors were bored from solid blocks of high-carbon steel, and condenser oils of solid drawn copper were consisted in the compressor bases, each of which was divided into 2 casings. Each machine had its own steam surface condenser, brass circulating pump, and air and feed pumps. A duplex brass-ended water pump also provided as a standby. The evaporators were correspondingly divided into 4 complete nests of coils contained in 2 D-shaped casings. These were placed in an insulated recess above the orlop deck level, directly above the refrigeration machines and near the 3 interchangeably connected brine pumps located in the adjacent room. The brine pumps were designed to be used for either high or low pressure, for affecting the circulation throughout the ship. The brine return tank was placed immediately above the evaporators, to which all returns from the refrigerated cargo hold and storerooms, ice tanks, water coolers, and cupboard coolers could be led. General refrigeration fittings. This schematic diagram shown in a Hall's refrigeration plant designed and installed above a Harlan and Wolff built steamer. All of the basic equipment and connections shown here were present in a much larger installation fitted aboard Titanic. Although the different equipment and certain details were spread out over a greater area and occupied space on several decks, in this diagram 2 refrigerating engines of a simplex type are shown, each whereas the machines on Titanic were of the duplex type. Cold storage. Poultry in a cold storage room above an ocean liner. This image is believed to be from a German ship. An arrangement of brine piping in hold. Arrangements of brine piping in refrigerated hold of a cargo ship of Titanic's era. Pipes and grating in tween decks cargo space. Typical arrangement of brine piping in tween deck area of a cargo ship of the era. Ice making machine on the ceramic. The ice making machines on the White Star Line ceramic, circa 1913. The one shown here is very similar to those used in the Olympic class liner. So when it comes to the water coolers each consisted of a circular galvanized steel casing fitted with a removable cover and an externally galvanized brine coil. Each was fitted with a bypass and a valve and a brine circulation with suitable brass draw-off cock. Each cupboard cooler was fitted with the galvanized pipes externally similar to those of the water coolers, with shut-off cocks or valves as required by their specifications. When it comes to the ice-making machines, Titanic had 2, located in a room of the stores area on G deck. With an adjacent ice room that was insulated and refrigerated, each ice-making machine was fitted with 12 galvanized steel molds or tanks, capable of making blocks of ice weighing 47.5 pounds. An ice rocker with a totally enclosed electric motor of 7.5 horsepower was also provided for breaking the large blocks produced in the tanks into small pieces. Tanks were lagged and washed cow hair 3 inches thick, retained by 1 inch thick, the pine matchboard strapped together by wrought iron bands. The machine operated by extracting heat from the brine through the expansion of the CO2, on the same principle as the refrigeration machinery. Since the brine froze at a temperature considerably below the freezing point of fresh water, it could be used to make ice. In regards to the insulation, the refrigerated holes in the storerooms on the ship, insulation could be described as the covering, the exposed steelwork of the hull with a thick layer of non-conducting material, so that nowhere would the cold air of the hold come in contact with it. Since steel is a conductor and is warmed by the outside air and seawater, it could rapidly extract the dissipated cold within the refrigerated compartments. The thoroughness of the insulation, or in other words, the thickness and continuity of the layer of non-conducting material, was paramount to its effectiveness. Once the hold of the cargo were chilled to the required temperature, if the hold were well insulated, both it and the cargo would remain at that temperature with little necessity of further refrigeration and minimal risk of the local warming that sometimes occurs through imperfections of the insulation. When insulation was imperfect, the temperature tended constantly to rise. To keep it down required the nearly continuous running of the refrigeration engine, with danger to the cargo due to variation in temperature. Furthermore, with a cargo of meat, if the temperature rose enough at any point in time where the meat began to thaw, it would be seriously damaged. If it were rare, however, this happened except locally under hatches, or where the insulation had become defective, or in corners under projecting stringers or deck girders, where the circulation of cold air had been impeded and had not penetrated. Frequently, the cause of spoilage was not due to any defect in the refrigeration. In many cases, the carcasses of meat were shipped soft and became so crushed together as to prevent the cold air from circulating between them. This particular problem was most likely to happen with carcasses placed lower in a deep hold. The insulating material commonly employed on ships like Titanic was granulated cork. Cork had the advantage, and should any of it leak through the wood lining or settle on the meat, it would do little or no harm. This could not be said of the charcoal insulation. Over time, it was determined that the cork lining forming the containing walls needed only to consist of a single thickness of 1 inch boarding, half checked at the edges. This was also much less costly. This is the arrangement of the brine piping. Plan views of the Aquitania's brine piping in a way of the fruit and vegetable storerooms. There is no plan known to exist like this for Titanic or Olympic. In order for the reader to understand how the ocean liner's brine pipes were fitted, this illustration is a good reference. Aquitania's refrigeration system, though manufactured by a different company, was similar to Titanic's. Beef and mutton stores on Aquitania. Plan views of the brine piping Aquitania's beef and mutton storage spaces. Poultry stores on Aquitania. The plan views of the brine piping Aquitania's poultry storage spaces. Cork was attainable in compressed slabs of almost any size, shape, and thickness. In order to ensure that no settling or vacant spaces had developed, periodic inspections were made of the insulation. Test holes were bored in the inner wood lining, where vacant spaces were most likely to occur. Such examinations were conducted by the Board of Trade on behalf of both shippers and underwriters of the cargo, certificates being issued at the beginning of each voyage on the efficiency of the refrigeration machinery and insulation. Insulation was also used as a heat barrier between casings and accommodations, and to mute sound. A prime example of sound muting was the insulated silent room built to house the Marconi transmitting equipment, which is very loud and obtrusive. Furthermore, insulation was used in the ceilings of the rooms underneath the galleys to prevent both heat and noise from above. First-class accommodations, which abutted otherwise loud passageways, were insulated because of the noise. An example of this can be found in first-class accommodations at the forward end of E-deck, where 2 staterooms backed up the working crew passageway, with several more abutting an athwarping passageway containing 2 of the third-class stairways. The same was true for passenger and crew accommodations, which came into contact with the slope chutes, and these being insulated with zinc corp slabs. Plan showing 3 main levels of the refrigeration plant. The main levels of Titanic's refrigeration plant and the primary spaces where it serviced on the bottom, the tank level and the main machinery in the middle, the orlop deck level with the evaporators, brine circulating pumps, cold storage rooms for the ship's provisions and cargo, and on the top, the G deck level with additional cold storage and brine return tanks. The angled hash marks between the double bulkheads indicates insulation. Cork slabs used to heat barrier and position along boiler casings when abutting. Passenger accommodations, thicker slabs, generally 2-inch cork, were used on the decks from C deck on down, and 1.5-inch slabs used on A and B decks. Areas that radiated heat other than boiler casings, such as the bakery and around the roasters and ovens, were also insulated as necessary to prevent heat transmission to adjacent spaces. This insulation may not have been as effective as intended. First-class saloon steward Frederick Ray recalled that some of the staterooms on E-deck near the engine and boiler casings were found to be too hot. Even the machinery casings in this area were lined with cork, as described. In Ray's opinion, this was where the vast amounts of cork came in from and was seen floating in the water the morning the Titanic sank. Large quantities of granulated cork were observed on the surface of the sea following Titanic's sinking. This was very likely the granulated cork insulation expelled following the implosion of the refrigerated compartments.